to do it, but if you want to put in the chat your name, any contact details and the organisation that you're from, it'd be really nice to just get a sense of the type of people that are attending this webinar and the interest that's taken up. And so if you are interested in connecting afterwards, then the details are there. As Vicky said, please put questions along the way of the webinar. If you have anything come up, put them in the Q&A, and then I'll try and field them along with Vicky's support during the session, and then there'll be time at the end, as Vicky said, to have a bit more of an in-depth Q&A, so hopefully people can get engaged. I haven't run anything like this before, so you know, first time, probably also first time for a lot of people as well in terms of attending something like this. I can't see anybody's face and I can't hear you, so just talk to myself, but I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to take you through a bit of a process around creativity and co-production. But just to start off, so as Vicky said, we're from Ignite Imaginations. We're a charity based in Sheffield, and basically our mission is to celebrate and connect communities in Sheffield through arts and creativity. We aim to ignite everybody's imaginations that we work with and support them with the development of skills, improve their well-being and especially their social connections. We're really keen on bringing people together through community projects and very much about participation. So we don't have an artist that stands at the front of the room and paints and people copy. It's not a lesson type setup. We're very much about working alongside and with our participants and communities to create an artistic response to a subject or an area of concern or a theme that themselves and the partners have wanted to hone in on. We specialise in visual arts and creative writing, events and workshops, and run everything from weekly sessions for families and local libraries to art installations designed by the community. We work with a pool of freelance professional artists, and we coordinate all of our projects alongside our partners locally, working with all ages and backgrounds, and really ultimately try and bring creativity to those that don't really often get the chance. And that might be because of their personal or economic circumstance, for example, and or the area that they are residing in, generally around Sheffield. So we've been working with Age Better now for 6 years. We've worked on about 3 contracts, but mainly on Startup, which has been a project supporting people over 50 to run their own projects in their own communities. So everything from gardening clubs to craft sessions. We've used our skills in project coordination and developing an idea from those very first beginnings to actually making something happen in reality in communities. And then also Sparks, which has been very much about supporting, again, people over 50 to engage culturally in their communities. So we've put on a variety of activities throughout this whole, I think it's been about 2.5 years of that contract, to bring people together and create more opportunities for social engagement. Throughout both of these projects, and I'd say everything that we do, we co-produce. And so I thought maybe I'd start off with a definition of co-production and then move into talking about some of the research behind co-production and the benefits of it. And then we'll go into some examples of maybe less successful co-production and more successful, what we see as a successful example. Then we'll hear from one of our artists, and then we'll have a bit of a summary, some top tips. Just to say, I suppose, also to set my stall out, I'm not an expert in co-production. I haven't done this research, but I have led this organisation for the past 12 years, and it's been a really interesting experience for me to think about this webinar, because I would say in a participatory setting, co-production is one of the same thing, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail. So it's really good for me to tease out what I think co-production really is and how we do that creatively. So for a definition of co-production, just to set the tone, I suppose, there's a couple of things here that I picked up on. One was that it's to produce something jointly, and something else I found from a healthcare service actually that had produced a document on this. co-production was defined as the interdependent work of users and professionals to design, create, develop, deliver, assess and improve the relationships and actions that contribute to health of individuals and populations. I thought it was really relevant because it really pulls out the fact that you're working jointly with those participants and users, as they state, through every single process throughout the delivery. So as I said, as a participatory arts organisation, co-production methods are very much at the heart of what we do. We work alongside our communities to produce something together. Our artists are facilitators. We encourage and support our participants to explore their imagination and creativity alongside one another. So, as I said earlier, I really feel like to co-produce is to participate, and that's where our expertise lies. We can't deliver a successful workshop unless we are very much working alongside and with, in an equal partnership with our participants, to explore a subject matter and to create something. So I've just got a few examples here of bits of research, which I will copy the links to into the chat so you can follow up at a later date. And I think Vicky will also include that in the material that comes out afterwards for the recorded version of the webinar. So you'll get all those links again. So I suppose also, just before I go into that, I wanted to just look at explaining also that I think with participation, a lot of the world, particularly the arts world, don't often see participation as what it is. And I suppose to explain that in a bit more detail, often people unconsciously are working in an audience and leader type situation. So you are the patient at the doctor's, or you are the audience member at the theatre, and you're having something done to you, even though you maybe are asked questions and you're engaged in some level in driving that forward. You're not at true participation / co-production level. And I think often for us within the arts world, that's really something that I think a lot of organisations aren't participatory struggle to see or engage with, that there is a whole process there, like I described a minute ago, from the very beginning of that design and creation to that delivery. And so we've had to quite out really what it is that we do, especially through our Age Better work, to really showcase the fact that that is very much embedded every day in all the delivery that we do throughout the organisation. So first of all, just go through a few of the bits of research that I picked up that I thought just were really interesting, and hopefully you can follow up afterwards if you're interested. So there's one paper called Education for Socially Engaged Art, and that states that participation is not about achieving consensus, compliance with the status quo. It's about provoking the kinds of reflection that can bring about meaningful and transformational change. I'll copy these links now, actually, as I'm talking to you, so you can see them. She says. There we go. So that's the first one. So there's also some work done by King's College London, and they did a report called Make, Do, Play. And these next few ones actually just highlight the importance really on our well-being and health as to being engaged at that level of participatory and co-production engagement, where you have very much a say in the development of everything that you are engaged with. So King's College London suggested that arts engagement can reduce levels of perceived pain. And the Mental Health Foundation did a report that suggested that increased confidence and self-esteem amongst participants were the perceived benefits of participatory art engagement. Through participatory art, many individuals exceeded their personal expectations about what they could achieve, which enhanced their mental health well-being. As we all know, I suppose, from personal experience, when you feel listened to and that you've gone through a process where somebody has cared, has really engaged you from the beginning, and then you see your thoughts and your suggestions being acted out, how much that does for your confidence and I suppose for your own skills, but also with the facilitators and people around you. So I'll just pop these little two in there. That's that's the King's College one, and then there's the Mental Health Foundation one. So I just wanted to check, Vicky, is Tim here?
No, he's not.
Okay.
He's not here as yet. So hopefully will join us at some point this morning.
Okay.
I'll give you the heads up if he arrives.
Fine, thank you. Yeah, so I knew that there might be a situation where Tim might not be able to arrive just for personal circumstance. So we'll forge on as planned, and if we finish a bit earlier, then either if Tim turns up, we can ask him the questions at the end, and/or we can just open the doors a bit earlier for Q&A, if that's right, everybody.
We have got one question that's come in already, which I can just share with you now. So Rachel is asking, do you find participants believe they have equal say and power in co-production, or does it take time for people to trust in that?
Yes, and that's something that Amy will actually talk about, which is one of our artists, and I'll play a film from her that she's pre-recorded. But I'd say, and it is included in my top tips actually, it's very much about building that long-term relationship. And I think it can go wrong often if you don't take the time to really engage with the participants and understand their, I suppose, levels of engagement and ability to engage. You might be working with a group that actually them just turning up on the day has been a real achievement for them for whatever their personal circumstance are. And so you have to be very careful and mindful about the relationship that you're creating in the first place to then open the doors to truly co-produce. And I will talk about this a bit later on, but I think you have to also reflect upon yourself and decide whether you actually do want to co-produce. Do you want to hear what people are going to say? Because there could be a variety of things they say, and then will they be enacted on? And if really your service or your delivery doesn't allow for that, then you have to be very careful about where you're opening the door for people to engage and input into the delivery. Okay, so shall I move on? Was there anything else, Vicky, at this stage?
Nothing just now.
Great, thanks everybody. Okay, so this was the point at which I would bring Tim in. So I'll also bring in some examples of my own. So I'm sorry, it's a lot of my voice at this stage. So we all know there's examples of tedious or tick boxy consultation, which I would suggest is not co-production. We originally started thinking, you know, what is boring co-production? But I really don't believe that you can truly co-produce without being creative in your thinking. And as a CEO of a cultural organisation, I really do believe that we are, as human beings, we are creative, even though you might not be able to feel like you can draw. You know, we are constantly thinking creatively in the way that we go about our day-to-day lives and how we're managing our households and how we're managing our workloads and relationships, etc. We're thinking on our feet and we're thinking of new scenarios, and to me that's a way of creatively thinking. So I don't believe that you can co-produce without being creative in your approaches, but I wanted to just highlight some examples where things may have not been to their best standard or not thought about in a true co-production sense. Some of you may have experienced questionnaires or paperwork or things where you sort of feel like, okay, yes, I'm just filling this in. I don't really even know where these answers will go, if they'll ever be listened to, and therefore you're not bought in or engaged in from the very beginning. I'll give you an example of personal experience where I think co-production, from my own experience, wasn't thought about enough. And I do talk about this actually in the podcast, which Vicky will share after this webinar. So I was delivering a workshop with some young women from Romani community and Pakistani community, and the idea was to bring these two groups of women together to socialise and to connect, because there was real issues in the community with those two communities. And so we were doing lots of drama activities. It was quite physical, and the idea was for them to get engaged with one another and get used to one another in the same space. They were all enthusiastic about the activities, but what I hadn't considered was how they would be actually physically touching one another. And they were fine to touch the girls in their own group, but they weren't fine to touch the girls in the other group, you know, just holding hands, for example, you know, doing those sorts of activities where you're all in a knot and all your arms are crossed over and you've got to try and get out of the knot. And really that was a failure on my part from not sitting down from the beginning, and A, I think getting to know the girls as best that I could, and B, those sorts of activities are seen as icebreakers in a lot of creative settings, and probably it needed to come right at the end and being more of a showcase of how far we'd come, because I had assumed that holding somebody's hand would be fine. And so therefore the relationships really and the trust broke down quite quickly. So there's something there about making sure that you really understand where your participants are coming from, where the boundaries might be culturally or personally, and working from that point up to a point that you would see as a mark of success. I hadn't plotted for myself what I thought would be, you know, the kind of basic minimum of their engagement to what I would say was an absolute showcase, which would have been them holding hands. I think a lot of the barriers for being able to truly co-produce, is often things like that. From that example, the space that you're creating, where are you? Is it a comfortable space? Can people even hear one another? Is it somewhere a space where people go to often, and so they feel like they can sit down and relax? You know, most of the time you're going to be a stranger in the beginning, and so how can you create that ambience that allows people to relax and speak up? Do you have the time and the capacity, like I said earlier, to actually have those conversations before you do anything, you lay out your stall, you know, you have that cup of tea, how have you been, where have you been today, get to know the people. Is the person that's leading the session actually a facilitator? Do they want to facilitate that engagement? Do they have the skills to facilitate rather than just lead? And as I said earlier, do they actually want to hear what people have got to say, be able to act upon it and learn from one another? And I think that's absolutely key. Because if sometimes you really sit down and look at what your delivery is, there may not be space, which is fine, for there to be true co-production. What you don't want to happen is for people to feel disengaged and disempowered because you've set the stall out and then you can't act upon it. If there isn't the space or the want or the will, then it's really important to be honest, for people to know, and for you to know, I suppose, exactly how much you can co-produce and where that co-production can go or not. In terms of examples of really good co-production, I'd like to bring in Amy, who's one of our artists. It's a pre-recorded film because she works on this day, and she is also an art therapist, so she's been through that training. So she delivers for us through Ignite as a participatory artist, and then she does her therapeutic work through other organisations. And she's just got some really nice reflections here about how she's gone about co-production, with one of our projects. So I'm just going to get that up and I'll share my screen. It's for 5 minutes. Just bear with me. Let's see. There we go. Sorry, it's all a little bit new to me. Okay, so here's Amy.
Hi, my name's Amy and I'm an art therapist and an artist with Ignite Imaginations. So in terms of talking about co-production today, I would like to talk about work that I did with the Dulham Housing through Ignite around the idea of home. When I begin any group, I find that it is important to have a structure which provides safe boundaries to explore within. And then within the structure, the boundaries can then become limitless. It is so important that the participants have autonomy and ownership over their work, because we never know what journey has led them to this place. And it's something that we can never take for granted. Another thing I find that sometimes I might even take for granted without realising is the impact of using certain objects or materials. You don't always know what the participants are thinking and the courage it takes for them to pick up and use something. They might have spent half an hour slowly building up the courage to do it, and equally you may not know that doing that was an absolute triumph that may have happened silently in the room. In co-production, in recognising and respecting someone's space and their voice lies empowerment. And if that empowerment can be available and drawn upon, and these may become lifelong tools that people can take away with them. I once had a difficult situation with a member of the group who had built up the courage to use a glue gun, and I advised she use PVA as it was stronger once it dried. She came back and said she was going to use the glue gun. At that point, I should have stopped, but I gave another reason why the PVA might be better. This was too much for her, and she shouted at me and left the room crying. I followed her out of the room, and we spent time together as she cried. She told me it had taken her time to build up the courage to use the glue gun, and now she had prepared herself, she wanted to use it. We talked it through, and I said that I was sorry I had not heard her the first time. We went back into the room, and together she used the glue gun. She went on to make a very important piece of work, which she said at the end of the project had changed her life. This particular woman had suffered such tremendous amounts of loss, much like all of the other participants, that over the 2.5 months, with the help and support of a very strong and supportive group dynamic, she was able to share this within the group and within her art. She had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Her psychotic episodes were so bad she was deemed unsafe that her children were taken away from her. The group became everything to her. She was finally able to begin the process of healing through her work, and we, the group, all watched this and stood by her in the process. Using the creative brain opens up neurological pathways that help us to problem solve and find solutions. Everyone in the group was going through their own transformations, building on their own solutions and finding them. One man had a serious brain injury from having his head literally kicked in by a group of young men. His brain damage was so severe he struggled to speak and process what people were saying to him. He told me one week that he had planned not to come back the next week because he didn't think he had any ideas and he couldn't do it. In the sessions, I would try to help him to think about how he might see his house, challenging the ways he views home. This was too much for him to comprehend, and any questions I asked felt like I was confusing him even more, which only fed into his belief that he couldn't do it. Finally, I said, "Can you write about your life?" And he did. And once he'd been able to find his voice, he found his way within the artwork too. A big golden ball sat on top of a fortress-like structure that symbolised him and his idea of home. I realised that the fortress-like structure might be his body, and the big golden ball, his head that had been so cruelly broken. The golden ball to me was a perfect symbol of his precious brain. The structure had windows that we could look through and read about the story of his life. From week to week, as the group went on, the transformation that I saw in him was incredible. The art literally transformed his brain. We went from speaking slowly and in very short sentences to laughing and joking, picking up conversations going on around the room. At the end, every single participant had been on a journey and were deeply and emotionally changed, including myself. I believe that if I had taken over in any way or steered the group into doing things that felt out of their control, that their journey would not have been the same. Creativity is a universal language, and it is a tool that opens up and accesses parts of our brain that gives us skills that some people have long forgotten. It teaches us how to play and explore, and it helps us to reimagine and process extremely difficult life circumstances. And within that, we learn to problem solve. Co-production invites a participant into a safe and equal place that is held by us, the artists and facilitators, and is a contained space in which to explore. It is within that exploration that the impossible is made possible, and where we work together to ignite imagination. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions, Vicky, before we move on?
No questions at the moment, Lou, but there is a comment which I just wanted to share. And one of the panelists is saying that I know one thing which is key to all of this is to not take anything for granted, and always ask people how they are doing and accept that people have their own values. And another is to know that you must listen to all views and learn to tap into people's skills and strengths. And it's about really sort of, asking permission as well, I guess.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. There's something here as well, I think, about the way, in a creative setting at least, the facilitator is holding that space. The want and the will, like I said earlier, to actually want to co-produce, to hear people, to use their ideas, but then to produce that final piece of artwork in a project like Amy described there. So in the end, they produced 3 heads, large heads that we housed in the Winter Gardens in Sheffield. And you could walk around these heads, they're all decorated very differently. And then you could also look inside them. And that co-production with those participants meant that those artworks came into fruition. The facilitator's role along the way to listen, to engage, to support was also to ensure that those final pieces were quality. And although she wasn't doing and making those structures, she was supporting the participants too. She was there to support with the development of those creative skills and I suppose some of that quality control, for want of a better phrase, where she was supporting and engaging those participants and taking them along a journey to ensure that that piece was something they could say wow to as well. And so, although she's not necessarily leading on creating those art pieces, she's very much using her skills, recognizing that she's the facilitator in that experience, and that's most importantly what they have co-produced is something to be proud of and to be seen and to be showed off. And so that fine line that facilitator treads about not getting too involved versus ensuring that the journey is supportive and quality throughout. So I wanted to just go through some of the top tips before we open a Q&A. I think this isn't just about reimagining your own co-production. The first question, as I've said throughout, is can you do it and do you want to do it? Do you have the resource, the time, the skills, the ability to actually listen, facilitate, act upon people's thoughts? I personally think it's a real shift in focus and drive for lots of organisations and can have a major impact on the confidence and well-being of your staff as well as your participants. So there needs to be the time and the support to invest in training staff, facilitators, and then engaging participants in an appropriate and safe way. So I've got some top tips for high quality co-production, which is from a paper that's written in partnership with 64 Million Artists and the Arts Council. And I won't drop it in because it looked like some people didn't get it in the chat. So again, Vicky will share this at the end, but it's called Cultural Democracy in Practice. Actually, I will try because I know some people might be looking at it as we speak. So it's just there. Okay, so in summary then, top tips for true co-production, and in my eyes, that is created intrinsically. First of all, that your leader is a facilitator, that they listen, they coach, and they support people to have a voice. A step before that is certainly that you need to train said facilitator to have their own voice and to be able to use those listening and coaching skills. That there is the agency and the permission, like one of the attendees had just put in the chat earlier, that people know what to expect, as you would in a quite a simple creative session with children in a school, for example. You do your your kind of guidelines, your steps to how we're going to have an interesting and safe session. So it's the same thing. Set your boundaries. Know that the people involved know what to expect, that their words will be heard and acted upon, and that you're willing and have the space to do that. I think we've all been in situations where people have provided their thoughts and feelings, and they can be as weird, as wacky as they come. And I think that's got to be expected and got to be accepted, and for that person to feel valued and listened to. So that goes into the next one, valuing everybody. Doesn't matter about their experience and where they've come from, there's an absolute equality within those sessions, and that you can manage expectations. So if somebody does come out with something that, oh, we'd love to do this project on a bus that tours around all the communities in Sheffield, like how you are then managing that person's expectations and their ideas. So it might be that you're guiding that person to, yes, use that fantastic idea, but how could we think about it in a more realistic way? This is the budget, this is the constraints that we have on the project, keep engaging that person so they feel value throughout, and that the outcomes and the constraints are really clear to them therefore. As the first description that I said around what co-production was, that there is an active participation from the beginning, middle and end, that the people are involved in every single stage if you are really able to do so, and you want this project to be absolutely co-produced throughout. You're valuing the process and the product equally. So this goes back to that quality experience. It may be that you come to a point where the programme doesn't exist without the participants, and often I think funders and partners find this very difficult to imagine or engage with. You know, you often have a structure or a thing that you're going to do that then you need participants to support you with and engage with certain elements. But certainly, for example, through our startup project, we couldn't tell AgeBetter what the groups would be, or how many groups there necessarily would be, and who those people would be we would engage with, because it's very much about what individuals in their communities wanted to do for their communities, and we were there to co-produce and facilitate along the way. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that you might not know what the end product is when you're starting. And finally, for you to facilitate those ideas, try things out, take risks, create that space that we talked about earlier for it to be safe and to use your imagination and very much be creative at every single stage. So in summary, I think for us, especially through Ignite Imaginations and being an arts organisation, it's about the want and the will and the freedom to be able to co-produce. As an arts organisation that has participation at its heart, we can be flexible within our funding applications. We can talk about how the creative process won't lend itself to an end product unless we engage our participants from the very beginning. This may not be the case for lots of services in the way that people go about their work day to day. So maybe it's about speaking to your line manager or your team about how you can work within the constraints of your service. Let's just say, for example, that you are a counselling service. You have a product that you have to deliver on in a certain structure. But are there elements within that there is flexibility where you can bring in, even though it might be a short journey from that beginning to end, where you can bring in your beneficiaries or participants to co-produce certain parts or certain levels of that delivery? And I think if you really looked at what you do deliver within constraints, there are areas that can be flexible and where really a participant's voice should be heard. So I hope that's been interesting. I'm going to just share in the chat some links to our social media and our website. It'd be great if people want to hear more. I'll also include my email address, so please get in touch if you want to take the conversation any further. And you can find out about what we do day to day on all of our socials. And just really would be pleased to have some questions that I can go through and answer if you're interested.
We have got a question that's come in, Lou, and it actually comes from Helen, and she's asking about the training facilitators that you talked about earlier, and for any ideas on where individuals or organisations might be able to access training on this approach.
And I was thinking about that myself actually for our artists, because as I was doing this webinar, I thought actually we haven't dedicated that time properly to our artists to actually like I said, this co-production, because it feels so intrinsic to what we do. And so I don't have the answer now, but I will be looking myself. And maybe we might even create something ourselves actually based on our experience to AgeBetter. So I can always share that with Vicky for you to share with the attendees. I would say that the cultural democracy paper that I shared earlier, that's through Arts Council and 64 Million Artists, is a great resource. It has all those top tips that I mentioned. And it might be that you can use that as a basis for your own training and discussion in-house.
I guess it's something that's really very much evolved, hasn't it, over the course of the AgeBetter in Sheffield programme and the projects that you've been working on. We very much use this sort of test and learn approach, trying things out and just sort of reviewing and checking out if it's working okay, and if it isn't, how can we do things differently? And so it's been very much sort of an evolving process along the way.
And I think you're right, and I think it's about a mindset that, like I've said throughout, that you have the want and the will, and you really understand what co-production means. So, you know, maybe formal training actually might not be the right path for some organisations, because it might be better that you have your facilitators and or staff in that room, and you're really outing to one another, well, what is true co-production? How can that look within our own service? And how can we make sure people are listened to and acted upon throughout?
There are the core principles, aren't there, that you can kind of follow, you know, the things like making sure that the trust and all of that is built, and everyone has an equal say and an equal voice, and you can kind of follow those key guiding principles and kind of work, like you say, around that, and see what kind of comes out and what that means, what each of those principles mean to that particular group of individuals. Because I know I've done a lot of work with other partners, and I'm really drawn that out, the kind of heart of co-production, what that actually means, rather than just the jargon of the principles themselves.
Definitely. And I think, again, if you're in that position as a leader or a manager within your organisation, that creative thinking for me, and the freedom to do that and to empower your staff to do that within a co-production setting, is really important. You know, where are the boundaries and the limits, but how far can we go and how far can we push this? And therefore facilitating and supporting those participants to do the same.
Rachel's asking a very key question, actually, and she's asking, how do you normally explain what co-production actually means? Because it is very jargonistic, isn't it? And a lot of the kind of explanations around co-production can be quite academic as well. So it's, how do you actually, what's the most simplest way that you can explain it, or that you explain it in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a really good one. And as I first started working with Age Better, I think, you know, for us to really say that we don't know the outcome because we need the people involved in the first place to co-produce, was a really interesting discussion, especially when you have a product that you need to work on, or a session that needs to be delivered. But I'm just going back to that original definition that I pulled out at the start of the webinar, to produce something jointly. I think that's the, you know, that's the absolute nub of it, isn't it? You know, and if you want to produce something jointly, somebody has to be involved from the beginning, middle and end, and their voice has to be heard and acted upon. So for me personally, that's the most simple thing, you know, that at its truest form, that is to produce something jointly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I've got a question for you. You talked a lot about building trust, and that's been sort of shared in the comments as well, about how important that is. And obviously we heard from Amy in terms of the journey that she was on with her group, and how that kind of started and evolved. But in terms of enabling people to engage and start to build this process of trust, and start to enable people to interact in this idea of building something jointly together, are there any particular examples of maybe activities that you can share, or any sort of things that spring to mind that might be helpful to people to start that engagement, really?
To set that scene, you mean, in terms of trust? Yeah. For us, most of our work is partnership working. So we often deliver a session, for example, or a project that will be working with a group that already exists, and we take the time to build up that relationship with the partner initially. And so there's a lot of that background work that's already been done. That group might already be attending a regular session on a Wednesday, for example, and attending for a reason, which might be to connect with one another, or might be because of their health backgrounds. And so the issue then for us is then to bring in a stranger, our artists, into the setup. And I'd say a lot of that is around us building that expectation with the partner, to understand what are the needs and the expectations within that group, are the things that the artist needs to consider with their planning. We also then share the plans of delivery with our partner, so they can come back to us and say, oh, you know, maybe you've got that wrong, or actually that would be an area that would be a trigger for some of our participants, for example. So we feel that the basis in the background of our planning, first and foremost, is informed by that partner. and therefore informed by the participants. And then I think personally, you know, creativity is a really nice way to enter a space. You know that you're coming to a workshop that's going to be fun, that's going to be engaging, and from the very beginning, that's setting that tone that this isn't about me leading you. This is about us creating something. And there often is a goal. We don't necessarily know the journey to it, but let's say the theme is hope, or there's always a positive I suppose, context for us to be within that workshop. And so people are already coming with that mindset to give what they want to give. But there's been so many challenges, and I'd say certainly when we're working with groups that have really suffered trauma and or where language is a barrier, and that's something that we battle with you know, a lot. And it ends up being that we don't necessarily do the work we want to do with organisations where our artists don't have the languages that are spoken within the group. And so it's then about investing the time in interpreters and or making sure that the activity is simple enough to be communicated without words, which we've done before with a group of refugee women, for example. And as long as there's examples there that are high quality, that they can see and they understand, then the work can be done that way.
Brilliant, thank you. And that is so important, isn't it? Because it's about hearing everyone's voices. So it's finding those ways to make sure that everyone's voices can be heard, and that people can actually participate. It's more of a kind of comment rather than a specific question, but Jackie's just said that she works with adults with learning disabilities, and her group has been asked to help the local council co-produce their strategy around council and health services and how to make them better, which is fantastic to hear. So Jackie's trying to find ideas to make this more creative and not just a meeting to talk about experiences. So I guess Jackie's endorsing kind of what we've been talking about, and maybe role plays or drawing a roadmap together might be a particular idea.
Yeah.
Because the subjects can be quite dry, so she wants to make it fun to engage with. So she's saying that any ideas are greatly received, and you're going to be running a workshop for us, aren't you, as part of our co-production festival of learning around all of the different themes that we've been introducing during the webinar series. Can you tell us a little bit more about that workshop, Lou, and just what's going to be involved in that for people that might like to come along?
Yeah, and I've actually got a nice example maybe that might just help with that comment, of which the arts organisation name escapes me, but I'll dig it out and then pass that on to Vicky to pass on to everybody else afterwards. But a similar situation, but the children were asked in the local town to present or re-look at the charter that they had for children and young people about how they were caring for and supporting children through the local authority. So it's a similar thing, you know, there's a policy there that's probably very dry and maybe quite meaningless to the audience, and then they are asked to deliver. And so the arts organisation did this huge piece of work, working with lots of children and young people in the area. But the most meaningful thing was that the children presented it back to the council. So the councillors and I think the leader of the council stood at the town hall. There was this massive parade with the children that came along, they were all dressed up, and they presented to them their charter to the council, and it came out on a scroll, and one of the children read it out, and it was in just such lovely, you know, child-friendly language. And basically, I assume saying much of what the policy originally said, but speaking to the audience that it was meant for.
Brilliant. That's a great example.
Yeah. So I'll dig that out for everybody. But yeah, the workshop will be a creative, practical workshop, and there'll be a couple of our artists involved, and very much be looking at those skill sets, I suppose, around how you can drill a bit deeper into that creative co-production and what it means to set out that space and that stall initially, I think, to set one's imagination and creativity flowing. So you know, there'll be drilling down into, I suppose, a bit more of those top tips that I mentioned, but with a practical element and an artist there to support us through that process.
Fantastic. We look forward to that. And part of that week that you're involved in as well, there'll be lots of other workshops and discussions around creativity and co-production. and some ideas around approaches that you might be able to make your own and take forward. So yeah, so if you can come along to that week, it's week commencing the 26th of April, the programme we're just finalising at the moment, then yeah, we'd love to invite you along. Well, I haven't got any more questions come up, and we're kind of coming towards the end of the time now. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, and it's really nice to hear it from the grassroots perspective. And we will be sharing a lovely podcast that you've put together with lots of different people within your projects as well, which is a fantastic listen. It's got some really amazing examples and thoughts around the benefits and the challenges of working in this way. So I'll be sharing that with you all, and the various links that Lou spoke about earlier as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Have you got anything else you want to add, Lou, at this point?
No, just thank you so much. You know, keen to carry on the conversation if people want to. Outside of this, I've shared my email address, so happy to talk further. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us today, everyone, and thank you again to you, Lou. Sorry that Tim couldn't be with us this morning, but yeah, it's just one of those things, isn't it? So we do have another webinar kicking off tomorrow on partnership working in co-production for those of you that are attending. If you haven't got the link yet, it's because it's on its way to you as soon as I finish this webinar. So the link will be with you very shortly. If you haven't yet signed up and you'd like to come along, then just head to our page on Eventbrite, Aging Better. And yeah, we look forward to the rest of the webinar series and to sharing the programme with you for our Festival of Learning very, very soon. So thanks everyone for joining us today.